Hello, Indian Creek 8th grade students. This is Mr. Roush. We're going to continue with Chapter 29, the Civil Rights Movement, and we're going to go into Part 3, which is the struggles that were faced in America in the 1960s. Segregation wasn't just in the South. The North also had segregation. What happened was a lot of the African Americans moved up north and moved up to the cities when a lot of the white families were moving out of the cities and into the suburbs. And this almost forced segregation in the North, where different races were living in different neighborhoods, they were attending different schools. This became almost like an involuntary segregation in the North. Soon the African Americans expanded their goal to fighting discrimination and racism in the North as well as in the South. High school and college students staged sit-ins in nearly 80 cities. A sit-in is the act of protesting by sitting down. Sit-ins were staged throughout the nation against stores that practiced segregation. Many of the store managers wanted to end the disturbances and the loss of business, so gradually they agreed to desegregate. Here's a picture of some students that are sitting down at a counter trying to end desegregation. A lot of the sit-ins helped launch a new civil rights group called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. It was a new civil rights group led by Ella Baker. The Supreme Court also ruled against the segregation of buses, but the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, wanted to see if the laws were being enforced. So on May 4th, 1961, a group of African American and white Corps members left Washington, D.C. on two buses bound for New Orleans. They called themselves Freedom Riders. The bus trip was going smoothly until it reached Alabama, where angry whites stoned and beat the Freedom Riders. Television and newspaper broadcasts reports of the beatings. The United States Attorney General Robert Kennedy asked the Corps to stop the Freedom Rides for a cooling-off period, where Corps leader James Farmer responded, "We have been cooling off for 350 years. If we cool off any more, we will be in a deep freeze." So the riders were facing violence at almost every stop in Alabama, but when they pulled up into Jackson, Mississippi, there was no violence. The riders exited the bus and waited in the white waiting area, where they were arrested and sent to jail for trespassing. Despite the violence and the jail sentences, more Freedom Riders kept coming all summer. And in the fall, the Interstate Commerce Commissions took steps to enforce the Supreme Court ruling, issuing new regulations that banned segregation on interstate buses. Now, in 1962, James Meredith was the first African American to enroll at the University of Mississippi. The governor of Mississippi, Ross Barnett, and the state tried to prevent Meredith from enrolling. Riots broke out, and actually 2 people were killed in these riots, but he was able to enroll and attend college at the University of Mississippi. In the spring of 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the SCLC targeted Birmingham, Alabama for a desegregation protest. There, Martin Luther King Jr. and many others were arrested. The national television showed videos of police dogs attacking unarmed protesters, children and others being sprayed with fire hoses. It did not look good for the rest of the country to see the police treating people this way. President Kennedy sent in 3,000 troops to help restore the peace. Then on June 11, 1963, Medgar Evers, the NAACP secretary, was murdered. The murder and the events in Alabama forced President Kennedy to make a decision. Appearing on national television, Kennedy spoke of the moral issues facing the nation. The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities, whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place? Days later, the president introduced new legislation giving all Americans the right to be served in public places and barring discrimination in employment. So after that speech to rally support for the Civil Rights Bill, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the SCLC organized a massive march on Washington. They said more than 200 to 300,000 people of all races attended. The march was peaceful. They were singing the anthem of the Civil Rights Movement, "We Shall Overcome." This is where Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech.
One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
So President John F. Kennedy's Civil Rights Bill didn't pass until after his death, and President Lyndon B. Johnson finally persuaded Congress to pass the bill. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed discrimination in hiring, ended segregation in stores, restaurants, theaters, and in hotels. And in the summer of 1964, thousands of people helped African Americans register to vote. This was called the Freedom Summer, but the workers also faced violent opposition. Even after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, African Americans still had a problem voting. Many states still had poll taxes and other discriminatory laws that prevented them from exercising this right. The next year, the SNCC organized a major demonstration in Selma, Alabama, to protest the denial of African American voting rights. President Johnson urged the passing of a voting rights bill. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 gave federal government the power to force local officials to allow African Americans to register to vote. This act led to dramatic changes in the political life in the South. By 1966, about 100 African Americans held elective office in the South. By 1972, that number had increased 10 times to over 1,000 African Americans elected into office. Not everyone was happy about how things were going in the South. Many African Americans were upset at the slow pace of the changes. They feel like they've waited so long for this and they need to kind of hurry up with it. Malcolm X was a leader in the Nation of Islam, emerged as a new voice. At first, Malcolm X criticized the civil rights goal of integration, declaring that the best way for African Americans to achieve justice was to separate themselves from the whites. Then, after he gained increasing support, by 1965, he began to change his ideas. Instead of racial separation, he called for a society in which there could exist honest white-black brotherhood. Soon after that, he was killed by an assassin from a rival group among the black Muslims. There was also the Black Power movement, which was a more radical approach. Here is pictured Stokely Carmichael, who was used to be a leader of the SNCC, and he advanced the idea of Black Power, which is racial pride where African Americans create their own culture and political institutions. Carmichael and other radicals called at times for a revolution, a complete transformation of society. Although rejected by such groups as the NAACP, the idea of Black Power had a great impact on the civil rights movement, especially with the Black Panther Party, which the Black Panther Party were young black radicals from Oakland, California. They were frustrated about the poverty and unemployment in America. They armed themselves in opposition to the police. There were many times that the Black Panther Party and the police kind of butted heads. There were many riots across the nation. The first major riot happened in 1965 in the Watts section of Los Angeles. There was a whole week full of rioting. 34 people were dead, and much of Watts was burned to the ground. National Guard troops were called in to end the uprising. Then in 1966, there was riots in more than 40 cities across the United States. In 1967, another major riot was in New Jersey. There was 26 people dead and $10 million in damages to the city. And in 1967, Detroit also had riots that shut down the whole city for several days. President Johnson named a commissioner to study the causes of the riots and to suggest steps to improve conditions. The report of this group warned that our nation is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. The wave of urban riots devastated many African American neighborhoods. The riots ended, but not before one last burst of rage. On April 4th, 1968, Dr. King was shot and killed in Memphis, Tennessee. This sparked riots in over 100 cities nationwide. Fires burned in the nation's capital, just blocks from the Capitol and the White House. Thousands of people attended his funeral in Atlanta, Georgia, and millions more watched it on TV. They all mourned the death of an American hero who the night before his death had said, "God has allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land." It was kind of odd because it almost seems like he was predicting his own death or knew something bad was going to happen. Well, that's all we have for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and have a great day.